Peter wasn't Peter, there would be no Archigram, because whatever Peter's drawbacks are, he really, the sort of personality Peter has was the sort of personality it took to create Archigram. And all our lives would have been so different if it hadn't been for Peter. God knows what it would have been. And yesterday afternoon I had an interview with Bill Menking sitting down there, and the conversation became almost, well, I think I should have lain down on the floor and Bill sitting behind me with a notebook saying, yes, yes, every so often, you see. And I was thinking, I think I was talking about a certain need. I think some of us in the group need to be Mensheviks. You see, in Russia in 1917 there were the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. The Bolsheviks were those inside the grouping, the society. The Mensheviks were outside. And I was thinking of a certain metaphor last night about a little ridiculous idea I had for a Ferris wheel, or London Eye, or Big Wheel as I think it was called when I was growing up, whose central axis would align with the plane of the ground. So half the journey, half the orbit around that axis would be swooping down through the underworld. And I was thinking about the comfort, metaphorically speaking, of being in the underworld and watching the stars of the profession perform, and sometimes being appalled by what they do. It seems to me a lot of architecture now is form-making unsullied by tedious considerations like program and so on, and how the work one sees published makes the work we did seem rather quaint, old-fashioned even, and strange. And I think our concern for making an architecture that related to what was happening in society was so strong. And I think this project, for example, I want to talk about it actually from the point of view of drawing, because I hope it's fairly evident what's going on here. Panels stored around the rim travel along tracks into the centre, open out and form a living space. But I want to tell you what it says about architectural drawing. It seems to me a drawing is beautiful because one can create the world according to how one would like it to be. And what you're looking at, that great flash of light in the middle, that the couple standing on the right seem ignorant of, is actually a large photograph of the M31 galaxy, which appears to us as a blob of light, hardly visible in the night sky, but in fact in, I think, 15 million years' time, it will look like that. And whether we're around to appreciate that image of it, I don't know. But I wish it could be like that now, and I wish it wouldn't affect our abilities on this earth. Yes. Well, there we are, the same project. Dennis and I set this up last night, and I rather like the little calibrations around the edge as a decorative frame. It's really about a building that gets bigger or smaller depending on the number of vehicles and people within it. Yeah, so, right. Shall I do that? Then I need the embarrassment of saying next to you. Great. And this one too is seen from the point of view of a drawing. Although it's a plan projection seen from some vertical vantage point. It's also from the vantage point of the driver sitting inside the car in the left-hand image, and as the car rotates into the building with him sitting in the car, because it's from his vantage point, his line of sight is always pointing vertically upwards. And so the buildings really relate around him, they rotate, and therefore the tube leading into it, which is really in the same position all the time, seems to be in a different position in the drawing. And to mention this drawing too, this is a drawing of the regatta at Henley-on-Thames. And obviously two group boats are winning. One's winning and the other's losing. And it's where I start to play a game with perspective projection, where if you notice the umpire's launch behind the two racing boats has been brought forward and has remained the same size. It hasn't got bigger, as things tend to do in perspective projection. So if you look to the right, as indeed the rowers in the leading craft could do, if you look to the right, you will get this rather nasty shock of a tiny model boat with little old men sitting in it. And eventually, if you brought it forward far enough, it would disappear. It would be a tiny little dot on the water surface. And this one too, I think what some of us have been interested in is a type of architecture which, in our own distorted way of thinking, responds to developments in science and technology and the way people live. And that the architecture we're envisaging through that reading looks very different from what the conventional practice is able to produce. This was a project which is different again, where it's an architecture of the imagination, and it's not meant to be instilled in this environment. It's something you imagine. And I think of that because it seems to me that teaching a bit at Columbia, the skill with which students produce rather awful but amazing graphic renderings of their designs, they're so magically done that the actual building they're designing, if built, could never quite match up to the computer rendering of it. So one could almost present the client with a computer rendering and then offer a Nissen hut for the people to actually use. And this is one where the shadows, it envisages two viewpoints. One is the viewpoint of the original photograph and the lens of the camera. But there's the implication that over in the distance, up on the hill to the right, there's another viewer. And rather than depict what the camera here is showing, you show what the other person in the background is seeing, and because he can't see behind objects, the objects leave a white shadow. And the boat in the foreground, which actually has 4 tough guys in it, applying the shadows to them makes it look rather like they're wearing wedding veils. So you could name this drawing "The Brides in the Boat," or something like that.